A single plant fed European peasants for 5 centuries straight. It required no annual planting, no fertilizer, no maintenance. Just put it in the ground once and harvest food for 20 years. Then, industrial agriculture erased it completely, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. I'm Frank Miller with Heritage Garden Wisdom, and the perennial vegetable I'm about to reveal threatens every seed company that depends on you buying packets every spring. This plant outperforms spinach nutritionally, survives droughts that kill annual crops, and grows food without asking for anything in return. The machinery of modern agriculture had to eliminate it because perennials destroy the business model that keeps you dependent. Hit that subscribe button right now if you want to know which forgotten vegetables could free you from buying seeds annually. Heritage Garden Wisdom exposes the food systems they buried under industrial farming. Smash that like button and drop a comment telling me which perennial vegetables you're already growing or which ones you want to try. By the end of this breakdown, you'll understand exactly why the perfect vegetable was deliberately removed from history and how you can plant it this spring to opt out of the system permanently. The plant that fed Europe's working class from the 12th century through the Industrial Revolution was good King Henry, Chenopodium bonus-henricus. From England to Germany, this perennial vegetable anchored cottage gardens and sustained families through brutal winters without requiring annual labor. The name itself tells the story. When King Henry IV of France promised in 1593 that no peasant would be too poor to have a chicken in his pot every Sunday, the peasants already had something better. They had been eating from a different Henry for centuries, one that didn't require a functioning economy, political stability, or royal permission. Good King Henry simply grew year after year, filling pots with nutritious leaves and shoots, while monarchs made promises they couldn't keep. This wasn't a plant you purchased from merchants or sowed from saved seeds each spring. It was perennial. You planted it once and it fed you for life. In March, thick stalks shot up, tasting remarkably like sweet asparagus. In May, spinach-like leaves appeared and continued producing until frost killed the foliage back. For centuries, these leaves formed the backbone of medieval vegetable soups, combined with leeks, chard, and bread in vitamin-rich broths that sustained peasant farmers through winters that killed the unprepared. The Romans understood its value. Pliny the Elder documented a plant that Emperor Tiberius demanded as tribute from Germanic tribes. Most historians believe he was describing good King Henry. An emperor wanted it that desperately. The Nutritional profile explains why. A 1989 study published in agricultural journals measured good King Henry's nutrient content and compared it to modern vegetables. In 2022, the Backyard Larder ranked perennial vegetables for nutritional density. Good King Henry demolished the competition, outperforming spinach, kale, and chard across multiple micronutrient categories. Iron content exceeded spinach. Calcium levels surpassed milk. Vitamin C concentrations were extraordinary. B vitamin content exceeded most leafy greens. This was complete nutrition from a plant requiring zero annual labor, no tilling, no replanting, no seed purchases every spring. It simply returned each year, like a loyal friend fulfilling an unspoken contract. The disappearance of good King Henry wasn't accidental. It was systematic elimination driven by incompatibility with industrial machinery. The murder began in 1701 when English farmer Jethro Tull invented the seed drill, a brilliant machine that mechanized planting but demanded absolute uniformity. The drill favored annuals, crops planted from scratch every year in perfect straight rows, like wheat, corn and turnips. Good King Henry was chaotic by comparison. It grew in spreading clumps. It propagated through underground roots. It refused to stay in neat lines. You couldn't plant it with a mechanical drill in regimented rows. You couldn't mechanize the harvest. In the emerging language of industrial agriculture, it became labeled inefficient, not because it failed to feed people, but because it resisted mechanization. When the Industrial Revolution arrived, farmers stopped evaluating food and started measuring efficiency. In 1837, John Deere invented the steel plow. For the first time, farmers could break virgin prairie soil and convert it into farmland at scale. But perennial root systems, the kind Good King Henry developed over decades, became the enemy of the plow. They held soil together with incredible tenacity. They resisted breaking. Annual crops with shallow, weak root systems were effortless by comparison. You plowed, planted, harvested, then plowed again. The system selected for annuals not because they provided better nutrition, better soil health, or better outcomes for farmers, but because they accommodated machines. In 1900, tractors replaced horses. Every single machine we engineered was designed to accomplish one goal: wipe the earth clean and start fresh every spring. Perennials like Good King Henry fought this process. Their roots penetrated 3 feet deep. They stabilized soil. They damaged plows. In the eyes of the machine operators, this plant's greatest strength, its extraordinary resilience, became its fatal flaw. It was branded inefficient not because it didn't feed people abundantly, but because it slowed down the tractor and complicated the mechanical process that industrial farming demanded. Machinery provided the method, but economics supplied the motive for eliminating perennial vegetables. In the 1920s, the modern commercial seed industry exploded, with companies like Burpee, Ferry Morse, and Northrop King realizing a fundamental truth of capitalist agriculture: perennials make terrible products from a business perspective. The economic logic is brutally simple. When a seed company sells you a packet of spinach seeds, you must return and purchase more next year, and the year after that, and every year following. That's recurring revenue, the foundation of profitable business models. When a seed company sells you Good King Henry seeds, they never see you again. You planted once, and your children are still harvesting from it 20 years later without spending another dollar. That's food self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency is the absolute enemy of agricultural profit. By 1950, seed catalogs had quietly dropped perennial vegetables from their offerings. Good King Henry disappeared from commercial availability not because it stopped working, but because it worked too well and threatened the business model. Then came the final blow, the Green Revolution. In 1960, Norman Borlaug introduced high-yielding dwarf wheat varieties with a straightforward promise: more calories per acre than traditional varieties. The cost was hidden in the fine print: total dependence on synthetic fertilizers, complete mechanization, and mandatory annual replanting. The Green Revolution saved approximately 1 billion people from starvation, and that achievement deserves recognition. But it also locked global agriculture into a system where perennial vegetables had no place and no future. Governments subsidized annual grain crops heavily. Universities focused research budgets exclusively on corn, wheat, and soybeans. Agricultural extension services taught farmers to think in planting seasons rather than perennial plots. We bet the entire farm on annuals, choosing wheat, corn, and soy. We accepted a system where 70% of cropland requires violent tillage every single year, destroying soil structure, releasing sequestered carbon, and demanding synthetic fertilizers just to maintain productivity. We traded plants that take care of themselves for plants on permanent life support. The consequences of eliminating perennials revealed themselves across every metric that matters for sustainable food production. Today, annual crops occupy 70% of global cropland, while perennial crops occupy only 13%. Consider the absurdity. 94% of all plant species on Earth are perennial, but only 13% of our farmland grows them. We chose the exception and made it the rule, then built our entire civilization's food supply on that inverted foundation. The soil degradation alone reveals the cost. Annual agriculture requires tillage. Every year you break the earth open, plant seeds, then leave soil bare for months exposed to wind erosion, water runoff, and carbon release. The American Dust Bowl of the 1930s was caused precisely by this process, plowing up perennial prairie grasses and replacing them with annual wheat. Perennials like Good King Henry develop root systems penetrating 3 feet or deeper. They hold soil together year-round. They prevent erosion. They sequester carbon. Research from the Land Institute demonstrates that perennial crops reduce soil erosion by up to 50% compared to annuals. Water usage tells an equally damning story. Annual crops lose up to 5 times more water than perennials because their shallow roots cannot access deep moisture reserves. In a world facing accelerating water scarcity, we constructed our entire food system around the most water-inefficient plants possible. Chemical dependency completes the picture. Annual monocultures require synthetic fertilizers because tillage destroys soil biology. They require pesticides because bare fields are vulnerable to weeds and pests. Perennials like Good King Henry needed none of this. Their deep roots accessed nutrients other plants couldn't reach. Their year-round coverage suppressed weeds naturally, without herbicides. We are now living with the bill for that decision. Soil erosion, water scarcity, nutrient collapse in our food supply. The annual experiment is failing across every meaningful measure. But Good King Henry didn't actually die. It retreated to the margins, surviving in gardens of stubborn grandmothers in Yorkshire, in wild patches near old monasteries, in the mountains of Switzerland. The vault is opening again because the rules are changing. We're finally recognizing that efficiency isn't efficient if it destroys the soil that makes future crops possible. In 2009, the Land Institute released Kernza, the first commercially viable perennial grain after 2 decades of breeding work. Climate change is forcing reconsideration of annuals as soil degradation accelerates and water becomes scarce. Suddenly, the characteristics we bred out of our food system, deep roots, permanent coverage, self-sufficiency, look less like inefficiency and more like survival. In 2022, USDA updated the Conservation Stewardship Program to include perennials for the first time, signaling recognition that annual monoculture systems aren't sustainable long-term. Good King Henry never actually disappeared. You can purchase seeds online today and plant them this spring. Unlike every other vegetable you grow, you won't replant them again. They'll return every year for the next 20 years. The shoots will emerge in March, the leaves will follow in April, and you'll taste something most people haven't experienced in a century. Food that doesn't depend on a system, food that opts out of the machine, food that grows on its own timeline by its own rules without asking permission. When King Henry IV made his promise of a chicken in every pot, he depended on wealth, commerce, and a functioning economy. When economies collapsed, his promise failed. The other King Henry, the plant living in gardens for 5 centuries, asked for nothing and just grew. One made a promise requiring the world to cooperate. The other kept a promise the world had forgotten how to hear. If this breakdown from Heritage Garden Wisdom changed how you see perennial vegetables, subscribe right now because we're exposing more forgotten food systems they buried under industrial agriculture. Share this with someone who needs to understand why the perfect vegetables were eliminated. Drop a comment telling me which perennials you want covered next. I'm Frank Miller, and this is Heritage Garden Wisdom, where we plant the future by remembering the past.